And joining us this morning to talk about that is House Committee on Ethics and Privileges Chairman J.C. Abalos. Good morning, Congressman, and welcome to Morning Matters.
Good morning, Pauline, as well as to all our viewers. Thank you so much for having me on our program.
All right, well, let's start first, Congressman, with the big picture. You said that several ethics complaints were filed during the session break. How many are we talking about, roughly?
Well, at the moment, Pauline, we are processing at least four ethics complaints, and of course, we are anticipating more. The Committee on Ethics is in correspondence with our prosecutorial bodies, such as the Office of the Ombudsman. And it's not only members of Congress who are allowed to file ethics complaints, even private citizens are allowed. So, as we continue to monitor the flood control investigations, as well as the conduct of all our House members, we anticipate that we should be receiving more ethics complaints in the coming days and months.
But if we were to talk about these four ethics complaints that are currently lodged right now with your committee, Congressman, were they filed by your fellow lawmakers or by private citizens?
Not all of them were filed by my fellow lawmakers. Some of them were actually filed by private citizens, and some of them were cases referred by the Office of the Ombudsman.
And without naming any names, Congressman, what kind of issues are being raised in these ethics complaints? If you may share that with us.
Of course, I would like to inform our countrymen that public officials should continue to behave in a manner that is expected of them. And that's not limited to their actions and conduct in the plenary. This includes their behavior when they come home to their districts. That is why we are constantly receiving ethics complaints against some of our members, and we will deal with them in accordance with our rules.
So it's not just their conduct within plenary or in the House of Representatives, but also outside. But how do you validate, Congressman, what constitutes as an ethics violation?
Right. Well, according to our rules, the jurisdiction of the Committee on Ethics, it covers the dignity and integrity, not just of our individual members, but of the institution as a whole. And you could actually find our rules on the House of Representatives website. So, as regards to our countrymen, kung meron silang complaints against lawmakers, they may file complaints in accordance with the form as required under our rules.
Why do you think, Congressman, there was this surge of filing of ethics complaints during the session break?
Um, that I don't know, but throughout my time as ethics chairperson, since the 20th Congress has begun, I made it the point that we will be dealing with all cases that will be received by us. And as a matter of fact, some of these complaints are actually defective in form. So we still give our complainants an opportunity to correct their complaints whenever we return it.
And I know that these ethics complaints are confidential by rule, but we do know already, Congressman, that the case of Representative Kiko Barzaga is back before the Ethics Committee, but he's already serving a 60-day suspension. So how will this work?
Right. There's one thing that I want to emphasize here. It was not the Committee on Ethics that summoned him for today's scheduled hearing. It was actually the entire plenary that did. Because when the Committee on Ethics gave its committee report and recommendation last December 1, it was adopted by the plenary. And as early as last week, the plenary could have already moved to discipline him further. Instead, the plenary decided that the Committee on Ethics in its next scheduled hearing should conduct an assessment whether or not the respondent indeed violated the committee report that's adopted by the plenary. So the plenary was actually very lenient by affording the respondent an opportunity to answer the allegations against him, even though they could have made a disciplinary action outright, because the Committee on Ethics had already divested its functions.
Well, what's being questioned here or pointed out is the social media postings, once again, of Representative Kiko Barzaga. But Congressman, does that count as violating House rules when he's already suspended or serving a suspension?
Well, at this point, at this juncture, it is too early for me to decide because we have a scheduled hearing about this later on. And we asked both the complainants and the respondents to submit their additional evidences. So later on, when we conduct our ethics proceedings, we should be able to come up with a recommendation after it's gone through our processes.
So for this particular ethics complaint of Representative Kiko Barzaga, this will be tackled today. Do you also expect to resolve it within the day, Congressman? And is Representative Barzaga required to personally appear before the committee?
Yes. If we were to take a look back at the privileged speech of our colleague last week, three motions were actually adopted by the House. The first motion is that the Committee on Ethics must conduct an assessment in its next scheduled hearing. The second motion that was adopted requires the respondent to appear at the scheduled hearing. And the third motion is for the Committee on Ethics to immediately report to the plenary its recommendations after the scheduled hearing. So after the scheduled hearing today, the Committee on Ethics must be prepared or ready to immediately report to the plenary its recommendations. So we should be ready by today. I don't know if we will be allowed to make a report by today or tomorrow, because that would now depend on the Committee on Rules if they would allow it to be included in the calendar of business.
And Congressman, you did touch on that privileged speech that was made by Representative Valeriano, and the plenary did refer this to your committee. But how does that work? Tell us, Congressman. Does that strengthen a complaint, or does it still go through the same evaluation process?
Right. The process here is actually quite different because, according to our rules, the Committee on Ethics acquires jurisdiction whenever there are referrals of resolutions or if there are verified and sworn complaints that are filed before us. What makes this case different from others is that it is actually a direct order from the plenary. The Committee on Ethics had already discharged its functions when it made the committee report last December 1. Therefore, any member could now raise a motion before the plenary. So, as early as last week, our members could have already made a disciplinary recommendation as regards to the respondent. Instead, this was actually an act of leniency on the part of the plenary. They would like to give the respondent a chance to defend himself and to answer the allegations against him that there were violations of, that there was a repetition of a similar misconduct.
Well, you did speak about fairness also, and I wanted to ask, do you assure that Representative Barzaga will also be afforded the same fairness? Is he allowed to make his case and also present counter evidence?
Yes. Actually, when the three motions were adopted last week, we immediately sent notices to both the respondent and the complainant. Of course, we're expecting both the complainant and the respondent to attend today's hearing because this hearing is actually very, very important. After all, our respondent is an elected public official, and it's very important for us to answer any allegations that are filed against us through the proper processes.
And this really sends a message, Congressman, that you take conduct quite seriously, especially even if it's online, how lawmakers present themselves and conduct themselves. So if the committee finds that Representative Barzaga did violate House rules, again, what sanctions are on the table?
Well, of course, if we were to take a look at our Constitution, ultimately, the power to discipline rests with the plenary. There's been instances wherein the recommendation of the Committee on Ethics had been modified by the plenary because the Committee on Ethics is merely a recommendatory quasi-judicial body that makes recommendations to the plenary. The most severe penalty, as enshrined in our Constitution, is expulsion and suspension, and it requires a two-thirds vote. Outside of that, there's been instances wherein congressmen were reprimanded or censured for their actions. And it would depend, of course, on the course of the proceedings.
Is expulsion part of the sanctions that are possible here, Congressman?
Well, any sanction is possible as regards to any lawmaker, and of course, it would depend on the gravity of the actions of the lawmaker, and of course, ultimately, it rests with the collective wisdom of the institution.
So someone would have to make a motion, tama ba, Congressman, to move to expel a certain lawmaker. Ganun po ba? Is that how it will work on the floor? Someone has to propose a sanction as grave or as extreme as expulsion, and it's not something that would emanate from the committee.
Well, of course, the committee is the recommendatory body, and depending on the course of the proceedings, the committee may opt not to discipline, or the committee may opt to discipline, whether it be a censure, a reprimand, a suspension, or an expulsion. Now, the committee report, it depends kung ito po ay i-adopt ng plenary because everything comes down to a vote, and of course, we are a collegial body.
To your knowledge, Congressman, has that ever happened before in history, in the history of the Ethics Committee? What was the most extreme violation and sanction meted out?
Right. In the 19th Congress, Congress has expelled a lawmaker. In previous Congresses, I think this was in the 8th Congress, the Congress almost expelled a lawmaker, but the lawmaker resigned prior to the adoption of the committee report. So it's not the first time that serious sanctions have been dealt to lawmakers.
Okay, so let's move on to the other ethics complaints that are being lodged against other lawmakers apart from Representative Kiko Barzaga. What else can you tell us about the nature of these complaints, Kong, no? Kasi there are also accusations involving bribery and corruption, as we all know, based on the flood control scandal. Ilan po dito yung ni-refer mula po sa ombudsman?
Actually, I can't give a number dahil marami na po. But one thing is very important. The Committee on Ethics, yung jurisdiction po namin, it covers actions during the present Congress. So, any complaint that is filed against a former lawmaker, wala na po yan sa aming jurisdiction. Of course, napakahalaga na may jurisdiction yung committee para maging valid po ang aming mga ruling.
But what if the acts were committed before the 20th Congress, but they are still members of the House in the present Congress?
Well, one important thing is that to take note of is that Congress is not a continuing body. And of course, dahil dyan, mawawalan po ng jurisdiction ang Committee on Ethics. But even though the Committee on Ethics would be deprived of its jurisdiction for actions done in prior Congresses, of course, meron pa rin po tayong mga remedies and reliefs na pwedeng mahingi through other channels. We can still file civil and criminal actions, and of course, the Committee on Ethics can still conduct its own investigations para lang masigurado natin na magkaroon tayo ng rules na hindi po maulit ang ganitong klaseng behavior.
So let's clarify that, Kong, no? So if we're talking about the flood control scandal, we know this involves the 19th Congress and even the years before that. So hindi sila pwedeng isama bilang ethics complaint. We can only talk about instances of corruption starting last year, starting July of 2025, kung meron man.
Well, one important thing to take note of here is that some of these alleged possible violations of graft and corruption are continuing violations. Naniniwala po ako na kapag merong conflict of interest, for example, and merong business interest ng isang mambabatas, may jurisdiction pa rin po ang Committee on Ethics sa ganong mga bagay. Because some of these offenses, well, it may have begun in the previous Congress, pero maaaring nagko-continue pa rin siya hanggang sa 20th Congress. That is why the Committee on Ethics remain prepared to accept any complaint that may arise from these investigations.
And Congressman, can we expect your committee to handle this decisively, knowing that you will be trying your very own colleagues at the lower house?
Well, of course, dahil ito po ay aking pinagsumpan when I took my oath of office, gagawin ko ng buong katapatan sa abot ng aking makakaya ang aking tungkulin that of my position and all positions that I may hereafter hold. And I serve at the pleasure of my colleagues, and I will do it to the best of my ability.
And how long do you expect, Congressman, this will take to resolve all ethics complaints? Do you have a timeline?
Right. Our timeline is actually found in our rules and procedures, and we have 60 session days to dispose of any ethics complaint that will be filed before us.
How many session days? Sorry, you were choppy there a bit, Congressman.
60.
60
days.
session days. Oo. And is this under the Supreme Court's definition of session days? Because that has been quite the topic of debates recently. How do we define session days pagdating po sa Ethics Committee?
Well, of course, whenever Congress is in session. So, yun lamang po ang definition natin. Napakasimple. And I would like to ensure to our countrymen na aaksyonan po natin lahat ng ethics complaint na isasampa sa ating committee.
And just as my last question, Congressman, because this is a time where public trust in institutions are quite low and quite fragile. How will this affect the image of the House of Representatives? And what assurances can you give the public that your probe will be all about upholding ethical standards and not about politics?
You know, I actually agree with a lot of my colleagues and our countrymen. The bigger issue remains holding accountable those who must be held accountable in the flood control scandal. However, wag na nating dagdagan ang problema ng ating bansa sa pamamagitan ng pagbe-behave ng hindi sang-ayon sa ating rules and standards that are expected of public officials. And at the same time, kung nagkaroon po tayo ng kasamahan sa Kongreso na nagkaroon ng allegation or complaint, whether it's an ethics case or a criminal case, they should show up. Kasi fighting for truth, it does not stop. You must show up when allegations are thrown against you.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. That was House Committee on Ethics and Privileges Chairman Representative J.C. Abalos.